Geraldine Jamieson on Manx Radio.
Hello and a warm welcome to my regular summer interlude, which over the next few weeks there will be a second opportunity to listen to a selection of my favourite programme guests. Now, my choice this week is Britain's most famous solo adventurer, the record-breaking Benedict Allen, who has become one of the world's best-known and inspirational explorers. Described actually as one who lives the dreams and aspirations of the adventurer, I asked him what drives him and how early on in his own development did this urge manifest itself.
Well, I wanted to be an explorer when I was a little boy, and it really was my childhood dream, so I'm living my dream in a sense. But my dad was a test pilot, and he used to fly backwards and forwards to Africa, and as a boy he used to bring me back weaver birds' nests, and I've got a little baby stuffed crocodile and a little snake that he put in a little jam jar, and he filled it up with methylated spirits. So all these things assembled themselves on my bedroom shelves, and for me these were exciting, almost magical objects, and I just thought when I grow up I want to see these places for myself. And I clung on to that dream of being some sort of explorer, and everyone said, you can't be an explorer nowadays, it's too late, the world's been explored. But I've sort of pulled it off somehow or other by essentially just working in a warehouse. That's what I did first. Went to university, worked in a warehouse, and thought I'd just do one journey, and I went off to the Amazon.
That was your first book, actually, Mad White Giant.
It was, yes.
The Northeast Amazonia.
That's right, yeah. What I decided to do was, again, childhood dream. I thought I'd try and cross through the land of El Dorado. I'd always read about Sir Walter Raleigh and how he got lost in the mangrove swamps of the Orinoco, and that was all very exciting. I thought, okay, I'll just do one expedition. My mum and dad say, you know, I might as well just see how it goes. I mean, they're very encouraging.
Almost like a gap year.
Yeah, exactly, yes. I hadn't taken any time off, and I was young enough to give it a go, but I think they just thought I was going to be a backpacker and stop at that. But I had these great desires to be some sort of explorer, but I had no money, and that's one of the great prerequisites for being an explorer. And so I worked in the warehouse and just set off there to the Amazon, thinking there are people who live out in the places like the Amazon and the Orinoco, and they don't need money. So on that sort of simple premise, off I went, and I was looked after really by Indians who were quite in touch with the outside world. They spoke a bit of Spanish and so on, and these people I think just felt sorry for me, and they the children gradually, well, I think they thought I was quite hilarious because I was totally incompetent in their forest, and they just thought I'd be fun to play with. So the children sort of adopted me. The adults got on with the normal village life. But gradually, through these children, I began to learn about seeing that forest as a home, potentially, not as a threat. And that's how I started to learn about the Amazon. And I mean, it all went badly wrong when I had to, unfortunately, eat my dog to survive near the end of that journey. And that's essentially why people asked me to write a book about it. It was about, I think, almost 6 months into the journey, and by then I'd been passed like a sort of package from one Indian village to another. Everyone thought they didn't really want me to die on their hands, I think, and they just sort of passed me on. So I was pretty helpless. But learning gradually about this forest, and amazing journey, 600 miles through the northeast of the Amazon, one of the remotest bits of forest. I dug out canoe and on foot, and then we came to these gold miners, and they decided they just didn't want me there. They'd probably found quite a lot of gold right in the middle of nowhere. And these people said, "Come on, get lost. We don't want you here." And I said, "I can't. I don't know how to live in the forest, and I need the help of my 2 Indian guides." But they got my Indian guides drunk, and one night they themselves were drunk, and the gold miners came up to me with knives. I just knew I had to run for my life. So I ran out from my hammock, jumped into my canoe with my dog, and paddled away, but eventually capsized, ended up on the riverbank with absolutely nothing. All my possessions, all my food, everything I needed to survive washed away. And I thought, am I going to see my mum and dad again? I was only 22 when I set off. And I walked and walked with this dog, and days went by. I got hungrier and hungrier, I began to starve. Then I got malaria and I got dysentery. And one day I remember lying on the forest floor thinking, am I going to see myself, see the outside world again? Am I going to see my mum and dad who've trusted me? Or am I just going to die here? And I had to make this decision to kill my only companion, which was a terrible, terrible thing for me. It's still difficult for me to think about. And this was almost 20 years ago. But I killed my dog, I'm afraid, in order to eat something to survive. And that's how I survived my first expedition.
Well, after this amazing survival and first expedition, did it cross your mind that you would make a career out of it, that you would actually become a television personality, because you're very much that? I mean, it's all very well to be able to write a book, which you obviously did, about that first exhibition. As I said, The Mad White Giant was your first book, and you've written it, well, you must be up to about 9
yes,
books now.
Feels like it.
You've just got the latest one out, which we'll plug towards the end of the programme. But because, you see, this is where you differ from most conventional explorers, that you learn about your survival and the places that you visit from the remote tribes people themselves. Now, you are never supported by modern technology and 21st century thinking. You really rely on thinking eco-friendly. So how would you rate yourself? Because you are popular. I've caught up with you when you're about to give an illustrated lecture here at the Air and Arts Centre in the south of the island, which has been a sellout for weeks. So, you see, your fame goes before you, Benedict. Now, how do you compare yourself then with the likes of Sir David Attenborough and Michael Palin, who literally have a cast of hundreds of producers and cameramen and the latest high technology you could possibly dream up?
They're doing a very, very different job. They're both communicators, and they're communicating often about the remote world. And essentially, that's what I'm doing. I'm doing what so many of us really would want to do. There's so many of us who, if they were told as children that they could be explorers, I think so many of us would have followed my path. It's just that we're told it's not possible, or you need money. I suppose I had that drive from somewhere deep inside me, and I never managed to answer your question because
you probably didn't like working in that warehouse.
Well, I didn't like that work, but that was all. And I was very, very clear in my mind. I wanted to be an explorer. I didn't want to be a TV personality. I didn't want to necessarily be famous. I think I just was immensely curious. You mentioned my approach, which is different from most explorers' approach. I go by myself. I immerse myself with people. That at first was just a practical solution. I had no money, and so I thought, well, these people who live in the Amazon and Borneo and New Guinea, they don't have money either, and I can just learn from them perhaps, and they'll feel sorry for me, and maybe I can survive that way as an explorer nowadays. But actually what happened was I'd stumbled across something very exciting and very new, which was that everyone said the world had been explored, but of course we hadn't looked at the world from the points of view of other people, remote tribal people. For instance, in New Guinea, my second expedition, I went through an initiation ceremony. Having had a disaster really in the Amazon, I felt I owed so much to these indigenous people, the Indians, who'd helped me until disaster struck and I ran for my life from the gold miners. I felt I needed to understand that forest and not just use people, but really understand their way of seeing the world. So I went through an initiation ceremony because the local people in New Guinea said, look, you're trying to understand our way of life, but you ought to feel you're prepared to do whatever we do. You shouldn't just be standing back as a Westerner, like a missionary or like an anthropologist. You should be really...
but would you say initiation ceremony, this was a punishing ritual? I must say now to the audience, this is where I do wish it was television and not radio, because when I first I've only met you, it was just about an hour ago, literally, Benedict, and I said, can I see your torso? I mean, yes, that's pretty good, isn't it?
I thought it was very forward of you, but no, I survived. No, yes, I've got these initiation marks up and down my chest and back. I thought this is going to be a terribly challenging ceremony, and unfortunately I'd chosen really as a society that had the most grueling initiation ceremony in the world. These people achieve adulthood through going through a ceremony that makes you a man as strong as a crocodile. And what happened was we were led into the crocodile nest. A 15-foot high fence was erected around the spirit house, which is like the heart of the community. And we were led into this. Our heads were shaven, given little grass skirts, led into this arena and told we were not going to be allowed out until men as strong as crocodiles. And the only bit I really knew about were the initiation marks. Basically, we were placed on upside-down turned canoes, and our chests were cut repeatedly with bamboo blades, and then right the way down our backs. I mean, we lost, I think, 2 pints of blood each, a litre of blood. So we couldn't stand up after this, and it's obviously painful as well as dangerous. But I got through that, and after 2 or 3 days of sort of recovering.
But they beat you also with
Well,
bamboo branches.
I thought the ceremony was ending there, and that we would just be secluded and learning all these important lessons that made boys into men. But unfortunately, we were then beaten. Yes, we had to sing happy little songs and dance around and around the spirit house while beating drums. And the elders came out with their big sticks and thrashed us. I mean, really badly. We were bleeding. Already we had these cuts from the initiation mark ceremony. But now we were beaten with these sticks. And this was really the heart of the ceremony. It was all about bonding. It was all about forgetting your individual differences and combining together. And you had to protect each other's backs with our own backs. And so whenever someone was being thrashed, you sort of would offer yourself. So it's all about learning the art of self-sacrifice. And this went on for 6 weeks, being beaten sometimes 4 times a day. So it's not the part of the ceremony that I knew much about, but I felt I just can't leave at this stage. I can't abandon this project. You know, if I'm really committed to being an explorer, and if I'm really committed to these people, you can't just walk out. You've got to follow this through. It was very, very tough. And 6 weeks later, we emerged, though, feeling absolutely amazing. We felt there'd been nothing as bad again in our lives, and we'd learnt our individual strengths and weaknesses.
And did the rest of the village sort of celebrate then, worship you to a degree?
Well, not worship us, but very, very proud. It was. I was very proud that I'd been allowed to take part in such a ceremony that had been so secret for so long.
You must have been the only white man ever to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. And now, tragically, in a way, it's never performed again. And this is part of my justification for going through it, because I thought this will create a record for this society. And times have changed. The forest has been cut down, and people no longer are interested in worshipping essentially a crocodile.
That brought, of course, perhaps one of your most popular books ever, Into the Crocodile Nest. Wonderful, wonderful title.
Yeah, it is I feel one of the best sort of acts of exploration I've done. It's not traditional exploration, but it's perhaps where exploration is going to go in the future, which is all about the mind. You know, there'll always be science, there'll always be species that we don't understand, but there's also attitudes of the mind. How do you perceive a place to be? And of course, the local people had seen the world from the view of a crocodile, which is like a role model deep in the forests of New Guinea.
Now, camels. You've had a tricky experience or two with camels.
Yes, camels are very misunderstood. I mean, some of my camels are very misunderstood as well. Some of my greatest friends really have been camels. I mean, I've had terrible times because camels don't need you. Camels are beautifully adapted to the desert. Of all the domesticated animals, really, they're the ones that can walk off any time and exist without you. Horses need water and so on. Dogs need to be fed. But camels, they've got their humps, they've got their noses, which can actually close if there's a sandstorm, and they've got their big feet and so on. So that they are amazing animals. And if you can get them to believe in you, that is, you become the sort of top camel, protective camel who's going to look after them, then they'll follow you. But as I say, they don't need to. They can walk out any time. If you get them on your side, a camel like Nelson that I had in Namibia is absolutely... It gives you so much because you can achieve a sort of freedom in a place like the Namib Desert, the Skeleton Coast, which should kill you. I mean, this is a dangerous, dangerous place, but with the camels on my side, I managed to walk up the whole of the Namib Desert. It's about 1,000 miles because this camel, Nelson, decided it was okay, I would look after him. You
became the first person to be allowed to walk the full length of the Skeleton Coast of Namibia in southern Africa. It's littered with diamonds.
Yes, I mean, the southern half especially, because they get washed down the Orange River from the heart of Africa, and we all know Kimberley and the famous South African mines, but actually a lot of the diamonds have been washed out to the sea, and then the currents off the west coast of Africa wash the diamonds up the coast. So up the Skeleton Coast we went, and there were the diamonds. So someone accompanied me through the biggest diamond area to make sure I wasn't secretly hiding diamonds in the ears of the camels. I mean, when we left the area, the camels were thoroughly searched. They looked in Nelson's ears, which he didn't like at all, just to make sure I hadn't put diamonds in there. And then I carried on.
Now, come on, you must have come out with one tiny little one
I wanted
secreted
to,
somewhere.
Just a little baby one.
Just a little baby one.
I wanted to. I didn't, actually. It's actually quite hard to find them. And this was a serious expedition, so it wasn't very easy to look for them. But at night, I used to go out, because I'd heard stories, that under the moonlight, the diamonds will shine out from all the little stones of the desert. But no, I didn't manage to secure any, sadly.
Now, this was really a 3.5 month journey when you had to survive extreme temperatures, negotiate some of the world's highest sand dunes, and cope with numerous dangers. I mean, we've talked about the camels and trying to train the camels, and sometimes they could be reluctant. But the extreme temperatures at night, to keep the lions at bay, you lit fires. But this indeed could unfortunately also be a beacon to charging rhino. You can't win, it would seem.
It was terrible. Some of these fears were, I suppose, imagined, but I didn't really know when I was alone there, because it was a very rare experience. No one walked with camels alone through the Namib Desert. People always go, if they visit the Namib Desert, they go with a Land Rover and certainly accompanied. But I was very, very vulnerable out there, no radio contact. So if the camels got spooked even by the lions and just ran off, I'd be in serious trouble. I needed those animals, and it's very worrying. I heard lions roaring at night and sort of growling and making funny noises all around me. And they were obviously fascinated by camel. I mean, the smell of camels, which I'd brought in from the Kalahari. They obviously weren't used to, so the lions were very intrigued. At the same time, yes,
the camels wouldn't have liked the undulating sand dunes. They're used to flat desert.
These camels in particular didn't particularly like travelling at all. I'd had to train them over 3 weeks in the Kalahari, and they were having a lovely life living in the Kalahari. They were on a massive farm, and they were the descendants of camels that were used by the Camel Corps, the police of South Africa, who used to patrol the Kalahari. And they'd had a lovely little life just sitting on this farm, wandering around. They'd never done any serious work in their lives, and the last thing they wanted was to do a big expedition. And so they tried to get rid of me before the expedition began by throwing me off and trampling me and kicking me. They knew I was a threat to their lovely existence. And they'd also had a very sheltered life. There were, I think, about 3 things they'd never encountered, each of which caused enormous problems. The first was sand dunes, and I always assumed camels didn't mind going up and down sand dunes, but Nelson was horrified by the prospect of going up and down these sand dunes, and I discovered the only way I could get him to go up a sand dune was to hum a happy little song, because he, by this stage, had realised I was important for his survival, and he realised if I was humming, I was happy and content, and therefore there'd be no crisis if he walked up the up the dunes. And camels are always having crises, they're sort of slightly neurotic animals. But if I hummed happily, Nelson would march up the sand dune. But it took me about a month to discover this. Up till then I was going around. Then he discovered women. He'd never come across women. And we met these wonderful people called the Himba, who were out there in the Skeleton Coast, and they loved Nelson. They'd never seen a camel before, but Nelson was horrified with these females. He just wanted to run away from them. And thirdly, he'd never seen anything bigger than himself, and we came across a giraffe one day, and Nelson had one of his crises. And
it's quite understandable for poor Nelson, really.
Well, you can imagine what he felt when we came across elephants, which are also out there. I mean, he would have nothing to do with them. He just dragged me away. But it was a great experience, and through Nelson and the other camels, I was able to experience this sort of freedom in this place that's said to be so dangerous.
Do you do your own filming, Benedict? I mean, in the 6-part BBC 2 documentary Edge of Blue Heaven that you undertook, now that was a breathtaking 3,000-mile trek around Mongolia. Of course, that's the land of Genghis Khan. And I mean, the whole BBC television audience were agog, for each part of that documentary, really, because they experienced it with you. Now, that's your charisma, of course, of being able to tell the story sort of privately, as if you were talking to one person.
That's the great joy of these little cameras I take. No camera crew, it's just me out there. And people are always writing in saying, it's outrageous, this man's pretending he's alone. Of course, there's a camera crew, but there isn't. It's just me. And that means that
I mean, you might stick your finger up your nose, as people do, sort of,
Well, I try and avoid doing that. But,
do you know what I mean? I mean, it's very natural, though, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, the other thing is that you just forget. You can imagine after a month or two out there. But that journey, yes, it was through Mongolia. That's the next one I did, having learnt so much from camels, really, through Nelson, walking up the Skeleton Coast. Then on to Namibia. There, the great challenge at the end was crossing the Gobi Desert. But again, without the camera crew. And it means you start confiding in the little camera as your companion. And obviously I was quite lonely out there. I think it was 5 months or so before I even got to the Gobi Desert. So 5 months of not speaking English, just meeting Mongolian herders who are out there. I mean, wonderful, magic environment. Still, people relying on horses, relying on camels. And I was just alone out there with them. But I would talk to this little camera that I've got very, very long arms, which means I can film myself as I walk along.
Yes, for our audience, you're exceptionally tall, I have to say.
Yes, I am, yeah, which is good. It means you can look a camel in the eye and it can't intimidate you too much. But it also means I can film myself as I walk along and set up shots with tripods, and all my camels and more recently dogs, they've had to learn to wait and be patient while I do all the extra bits of filming for the BBC. But it's been great because it means I've been able to share the experience.
Do you write a diary every night?
Yeah, it's an exhausting procedure. I mean, not only am I running an expedition by myself, safeguarding, hopefully, the lives of my animals and also myself, but also writing diary to record facts that I need for later for writing a book, but also talking into the camera, explaining what's going on. And my hopes and fears. So it is very intimate. It catches those the ups and downs, as you say, the bit where I put my finger up the nose. Although I try not to do that. But
well, somebody today actually said that they saw you do that. That's
terrible. Are you sure?
Isn't it terrible? You see, they haven't mentioned the rest of this exciting series. You know, just that human factor.
Oh dear, maybe that was Michael Palin. That one little bit. But,
and how can you hold a pencil to write a diary in Siberia? When you did that one, which of course converted into the ice dogs,
yes.
I mean, that apparently was the worst winter in living memory.
That was not part of the plan.
And your dogs, I mean, were a rabble.
Yes. They were it was everything combined against me, actually. I felt I knew about camels. I'd learnt how to be comfortable in places like the Gobi Desert and the Namib Desert. And I thought, what about this other animal that has a special relationship with mankind, and that's the dog. And so I went to the remotest part of Siberia that's inhabited, and the idea was that I'd learn to use a dog team and travel 1,000 miles up and try and cross the Bering Strait. That failed, essentially, the crossing of the Bering Strait, because of this terrible, terrible winter. But it was also exacerbated by the fact that the owner of the dogs wasn't there to teach me the commands, the left and right, and stop was always very important. So the key man who was going to teach me everything just couldn't be there because he was stuck because of this terrible winter. So I had to learn from scratch from dogs that had no trust in me whatsoever. They were waiting for their owner to turn up. But gradually, during this 1,000-mile journey, I managed to get these dogs on my side in this terribly dangerous environment, much more dangerous than an ordinary desert or, that is a hot desert or the jungle. Because in the Arctic, if the ice breaks, you go through into that freezing water and you just die, probably in 30 seconds, because you'd have a heart attack. Your dogs would die as well. And I was determined, especially because of this experience on my first expedition where I'd had to eat my dog to survive, not to let down these 10
I mean, you
dogs.
existed virtually on a diet of walrus.
Walrus...
What's it like? What sort of flavour?
Oh, it's bad. Raw walrus, that was the term, it's raw. And the fat was wonderful. It's about an inch of fat, and it's like pure energy. And out there, when it's minus 40 or worse...
That's what you need.
It's what you need. You feel like biting into this fat.
A banana wouldn't be much use to you.
It wouldn't, although it would have been... Everything's frozen, of course, so I don't know, frozen banana. You'd be like cement trying to eat through it. But this fat was not bad, but the flesh was terrible, like putrid fish. So I avoided the meat of the raw walrus and went for the inch of fat. And then I had raw whale, a raw seal, and so on. All of these things full of vitamins because they're raw, but essentially not my preferred diet, I must say. But they were what the Chooches had, the reindeer herders, and these people were with me for the first 2/3 of the journey, and then I set off alone, and that was the wonderful bit. These dogs really did respond to me. All of them, really, apart from Bernard, who was a strange dog. Bernard didn't do any pulling, and I couldn't think why he was there at all. I mean, this is Siberia, where people rely for their lives on these dogs to hunt with them and take them safely over the frozen water. But Bernard didn't pull, and I discovered the only reason why Bernard was there was because he was best friends with Jeremy, and Jeremy was the brain box of the team, who needed his brain, but he wouldn't do anything without his best friend Bernard. So this was a sort of problem I was trying to solve as we went along.
You have to be an animal psychologist, really.
Yes, and learn to get the trust, essentially, of the top dog. I had this wonderful dog I called Top Dog, who was at the front. And he was this brave, intelligent dog, with the first one that would face smells of polar bears, smells of wolves, smells of the most deadly thing of all, water, when there's thin ice. So this brave dog out in the front, listening to my commands. Tachte, which means left, stu, which means right. And these dogs obeyed me, finally, and it was wonderful, this relationship again. They trusted me, I trusted them, and we had this freedom out there in the Arctic, this highly dangerous place.
What does this come into? I know you've written, of course, the book, as I said, Ice Dogs, but your latest work in book form is entitled The Paper Book of Exploration, published by Faber, just out this week as we speak. Now, that actually is about other explorers, not so much yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very lovely. So almost 20 years now I've done my own thing, in a sense, but this was a chance to look at all the great heroes of exploration. Not necessarily ones we know about. I mean, there are stories of Shackleton and his ship, the Endurance, the way it was crushed by ice, and this poor man's hopes and dreams of being a great hero of exploration ruined as his ship was pulled apart, and yet his men stuck by him and he got them all safely out. Wonderful stories like that. James Cook, wonderful, I mean, navigator of genius, but for me, the best of the lot, because he was such a human person. I mean, there's a lovely tale of him arriving in New Zealand and the Maoris being absolutely frightened and standing on this little rock, shivering with fear, and then raising their spears, wondering if they should kill him or not, or whether Cook was a god. And Cook waded through the water towards this little bunch of people who were shivering away with fear. And he went up to this man, showed he had spread his arms to show he didn't have any weapons, and then he hugged this man and rubbed his nose in the traditional greeting with this Maori. And that was a special man, you know, who was not just of his time, but of all time. And he was able to see these other people as not as savages or backward or primitive, but as people. So people like that, and ordinary people, anonymous mariners who we don't even know the names of, but who died in remote shores, you know, just trying to understand the world.
Well, finally, because unfortunately this clock has literally beaten us, one often hears the phrase, you touched on it yourself earlier, that the world, our planet, is becoming a smaller and smaller place. Are there areas left, you know, for an insatiable explorer like yourself to discover?
Well, that's what I'm trying to say in the Faber Book of Exploration, that I was told as a child there's nowhere left to explore, and the central message is that, of course, there's a world to explore. It's not the same exploration of the old days. There aren't the great grand journeys, but it's an exciting world out there. We only know maybe 1/10 or 100th of the world's species. We don't even know how many species are out there. But it could be that we've only even named 1% of the world's species. So there's masses out there to discover. We've mapped the surface of the moon better than the surface of the ocean floor. So it's an exciting world, and that's what I was trying to get over.
Well, my most famous solo adventurer and explorer, obviously your charisma belies this grim determination to complete these thrilling expeditions, and of course endears you to a vast public audience, including our listeners here on Manx Radio today. Benedict Allen, thank you so much for joining me on the Geraldine Jamieson interview this week.
Thank you.